Well, folks, we may as well get started here. Welcome to Chik-Wauk. Got an exciting event here today, but before we get started, just wanted to welcome you all to the museum. My name is Caroline. I've been working here for 3 seasons, mostly in the Nature Center. And I did want to just let you know we do have some awesome sponsors for our events throughout the course of the summer. We've got Visit Cook County helping us out, and the Gunflint Trail Historical Society Gift Club is also supporting our events here. We've got a lot of speakers coming to the Nature Center throughout the course of the summer. They're generally on Sundays, but check our calendar if you'd like to see what's coming up next. At Chik-Wauk next week on Sunday, June 28th, we have Keith Morris, another author, Minnesota author, coming to join us here in the Nature Center. So join us for that. But today, we're all here for Cary Griffith, who's joined us. He's the author of many, many books, fiction and nonfiction. We do have a good number of his work out in the back corner there. Sherilyn can help you out. If you are interested in going home with a book, you can grab it here if you are interested, and if Cary would like to sign it for you, maybe that could happen, but you are going to have to pay at the museum, so don't forget to do that if you are interested. But without further ado, I'll welcome Cary on up.
Thank you, you guys, and thank you very much for coming out on Father's Day. You know, I feel like it's Father's Day. I listened to this program coming up here on the radio the other day about what makes a good Father's Day joke, and it has to be short, it has to be really clean, and it has to be corny and probably incorporate a pun. So, why does a chicken coop have 2 doors? Because it's not a sedan. Okay, I won't worry. That's exactly the kind of response I get out of my children. Thanks again for coming today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be talking today about my next nonfiction book, which won't be out until March of next year, but it has some interesting stories in it that I want to share with you today. But as a more tangible way of saying thanks, I'm going to give someone in this room a free copy of this book. But I don't just give it to anyone. This is how it works. At the end of my remarks, has anybody been to one of my book giveaways before? Oh, good. Good. At the end of my remarks, I'm going to have 3 true-false questions for you. I'm going to give you the answer to those questions during my talk. Now, if you get all 3 questions correct, you're in the running to win a free book. Now, I grew up in a time when we had a very liberal, we graded on a very liberal curve. So if you miss 1 or 2, you're probably still in the running to win a free book. Now, I can't give a free book to everyone, so I have a way of determining who wins a tie. Okay, so you have to pay attention. I write books about wild places, nonfiction and fiction. All of my books are set in Minnesota. Today I'm going to spend most of my time, now this is not, my latest nonfiction book is called The Wolf Divide, Hunters, Ranchers, and Conservationists. It's really about the controversy of wolves, not just in Minnesota, but in the lower 48. My book, my 6th Sam Rivers mystery came out on June 3rd, just this month, and as I mentioned, all my books are set in Minnesota. You probably ask yourself, do we have grizzly bears in Minnesota? I know you guys are savvy enough to know that no, we don't have grizzly bears in Minnesota, but in this book, Sam Rivers is a keynote speaker at a resort, much like, you know, when I write fiction, I kind of draw on experience, and I call the Peterson's Resort I talk about in Grizzly Narrows as a cross between Gunflint Lodge and Grandview down on Gull Lake in Brainerd. So if you're familiar with those, it's a really nice resort. He's there. He reprises a time when early in his career when he was in southern Manitoba, and northern Montana, and he encountered a grizzly poacher, and there's a firefight that happens, and the scientist that he's in the bush with in a place called Grizzly Narrows gets shot and killed. Sam Rivers shoots the poacher and he wounds him, and the poacher runs off and is never heard from again. Now fast forward to contemporary Peterson's Resort in northeastern Minnesota, where Sam is keynote, and he hears about a grizzly head that's posted on a bridge called the Narrows in the western part of the county, here, up in this area, and he knows it's some kind of message for him. And so he goes to investigate. It actually turns out to be an ambush. People want to get rid of Sam Rivers. He's made a lot of enemies over the years, and that is in part what this book, Grizzly Narrows, is about. But today I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the Wolf Divide. I'll start with a brief story. On June 21st, in 2018, just 8 years ago, 18-year-old Savannah Johnson is doing what she does most mornings during the summer during calving season. Savannah lives on a cattle ranch over north of Orr, about 20 miles south of Voyageurs National Park, in that area, right in the heart of the wilderness, not far from here. She lives on that, and every morning she wakes up and she saddles her favorite horse and she goes out on their 1,500-acre cattle ranch, and she monitors, she looks at all the cows and the calves that they have just to make sure they're all okay. Now this is 1,500 acres set in the middle of the woods, set in the middle of wolf country. They have wolf problems. She wakes up that morning, just, patrolling that much ranch takes her about 2 to 4 hours, and she comes towards the end of her patrol, and there is a 40-foot or a 40-yard space of pasture between the trail that she's on and the woods that mark one of the borders, and she hears a calf bawling. And she wonders, well, what's wrong? And she starts riding with her horse up, and she sees a calf in tall grass, and the grass is not only tall, but it's this time of year, so there's beautiful flowers. There's daisies and the yellow flowers. I think those are hawksweed here. I'm not sure, that line the road when I was driving up. All those kinds of flowers are in this pasture, and she can see there's a little calf, and there's no mother nearby. She can see it making all kinds of bawling noises, and it's just stuck there in the grass. And she starts going up to it, and it's only when she gets, probably from me to the middle of the room here, that she sees that underneath it is a wolf, and the wolf has hold of the calf's neck like this. And Savannah is not a shy person. And she actually took a video of this, and she said, F you, get the hell away! And she chased the wolf away, and the wolf goes into that nearby tree line and just stands there. And Savannah calls her grandfather, who lives on the farm, Wes Johnson. I'm going to talk about him in a little while. Wes Johnson is there, and he comes out with his rifle. Now, Wes has probably shot 50 wolves over the last 30 years. Wolves that have harried his cattle. He has approximately 600 Red Angus cattle, and during the summer, during calving season, they have approximately 200 calves. And some of the calves are sometimes taken by wolves. And so, sure enough, by the time Wes gets there, the wolf has faded into the wilderness, and they get the calf back to the barn. Well, unfortunately, it has a sad story. The calf dies 2 days later from the wounds from the wolf predation, for the attempted wolf predation. But in Minnesota, we have the USDA Wildlife Services, and they reimburse if they can find a carcass, if they can find evidence. They reimburse the rancher for the loss of the calf, and certainly that's what happens in this case. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to this point in where we are today with regard to wolves. But before I do, I have to say, whenever I write a nonfiction book, I have a lot of people to thank, and these are some of the people I interviewed for this book. Dave Meach, a well-known wolf biologist. John Hart, formerly with the USDA Wildlife Services, a trapper, a guy that we'll talk more about in a little bit. Lizzie Pennick, I didn't actually interview her, but I quote heavily from a podcast that she's in as a lawyer for Wild Earth Guardians. These people were really nice in sharing their stories and letting me talk about them in the book. There's also, there's Janet McNally, whose story I tell in the book. I'm not going to talk about her today, but she's a shepherd who lost, in 1 year, lost 75 lambs to wolf predations. And there's Wes Johnson, the guy that I was just telling you that's Savannah's grandfather, that has that farm, that ranch over near Orr. We'll talk a little bit about that. I interviewed hunters, farmers, conservationists, trappers, ranchers, and everybody has an opinion, probably like in here. Everyone has an opinion about wolves. Now, what I like about this map is how we got here. It used to be, before we were ever here, there were an estimated between 250,000 and 2 million wolves across the entire United States. And you can see any place there's green on this map and yellow and everything else, all of that used to be the territory of wolves in the lower 48. There were a lot of wolves, and in fact, I looked at the Lewis and Clark journals and I found lots of quotes about wolves when they came out here, and they were all over the place. Of course, they were following the huge herds of ungulates, antelopes, buffalo, elk, deer. They were feeding on them. Those were their primary food sources. By the 1960s, all of these were eradicated. When the new people came over to the new continent, the new world, the first thing they started doing was eliminating wolves. And they did it legally. They did it through bounties. Many municipalities on the East Coast started bounties early on, well before the Declaration of Independence. And that continued all the way up until 1962. The last state to get rid of a wolf bounty was Minnesota. And part of the reason for that is because we were the only place you could still find wolves in the lower 48. There were about 300 to 400 right here where we are now. There were 300 to 400 wolves, and that was the only wolves across America. Now, they've had a resurgence. In 1973, they passed the Endangered Species Act. Then they were put on the list as threatened and endangered in 1974, and since then they have expanded their territory. They've come into all the way south in Minnesota, into northwestern Wisconsin, into the upper peninsula of Michigan, over here, out west in these pockets, in this big pocket, not without controversy. Today's numbers, we have approximately 3,000 in Minnesota. That's held firm. But you can see there's a lot of wolves, but there aren't that many still in California as of 2024. There are only an estimated 70 in Colorado, 30 as of 2025. And then the last two rows are the Mexican wolf, which is a little different, but it is also being sort of reintroduced and making its way here. Now, the population trends for the last 10 years, or at least 2014 to 2024, are wolves are increasing. If you protect wolves, and not every state does, Minnesota still does, and it's very controversial. If you protect wolves, they thrive. They find a way. Sometimes they find a way by predating cattle or livestock, sheep, or different stuff other than wild ungulates. I like this map because this kind of shows you over the years, go back to, I said, you know, this area was the only place you could find wolves back in the 1960s, 1970s, then the Endangered Species Act. They got protected. They've been protected pretty much ever since, with the exception of 2 or 3 years. Judges have put them back on the list. And so they've gradually made their way down here. All the way, they've covered all this territory. Interestingly, Janet McNally, that shepherd I was telling you about, that I tell her story in the book, how she lost 75 lambs in 1 year, 1999. She lost those in 1999 south of Hinckley right here. Now, according to this map and the DNR, the wolves weren't even in that area until 2013 to 2018. So the government authorities don't always get it right. But it gives you an idea of how wolves have expanded. This shows you we had a growing and a pretty stable population of wolves up until, you know, the year 2000. For the last 30 years, it's been pretty stable, and they've been protected. Now, what happens when you have this many wolves in that area that I showed you before in the map in Minnesota? There's a lot of people, a lot of ranchers, a lot of farmers with livestock, and there is bound to be conflict. And you can see here that the USDA Wildlife Services, anytime a farmer like Wes Johnson loses a calf, they call up Wildlife Services. They come out, they trap the wolf, and they kill it and they remove it. And you can see over the years they've had quite a few. In 2020 they had over 200. And in 2022, the last year that they have statistics for, it was nearly 150. So they're being removed. Now, there's bound to be conflict, and conflict among people who have very divergent perspectives about wolves. And I tell the story, one long story in the book about wolf researchers, ranchers, and trappers. The ranchers were Wes, Bob, and Savannah Johnson. I've already mentioned Wes, the grandfather, and Savannah, the granddaughter. Bob is Savannah's dad, Wes's son. They all live on that ranch over in Orr. And there's researchers Tom Gable right here and Austin Homkus right there. That's with Wes over there. There's conservation officers that can also verify wolf kills for reimbursement. And then there was Wildlife Services Supervisor John Hart. I talk about all these people, as well as non-lethal wolf specialist Jack Morosinski. But let's talk a little bit, before I get into this important meeting that they have in 2020 in Wes's barn, let's talk a little bit about each of them and how they got to where they are. Wes Johnson, in the 1970s, his family, this is actually the 1,500-acre ranch that I was talking about north of Orr, south of Voyageurs National Park. And when his parents rented that farm, he grew up there. The farm was probably about 350 acres. It was a well-known piece of land because when logging used to be done in the area, it was a huge natural pasture in the middle of the woods, and they used to take logging horses and they'd graze them there in the summer, and then in the winter when they were cutting down the woods, they'd use the horses to haul the timber out of the woods. Now, after the timber industry waned in the area and they got rid of the horses, a guy bought the property and tried to make it into a sheep ranch road. Actually, that's how this road going into the area got its name, Sheep Ranch Road. This goes right into their house, right into their main area in the ranch. So Sheep Ranch Road was started there, and then Wes actually worked there right out of high school managing a cattle ranch for a guy who owned it in Arizona. Eventually that guy sold out to some other people, but Wes, in 1970, 71, he was having problems when he was managing it just as a kid. When he was managing the cattle on the ranch at the time, and there were wolves in the area. Now remember, this is 1970, so there weren't a lot of wolves in the area, but they weren't on the list yet. They weren't protected under the endangered species list. And Wes talked to a local conservation officer, and the local conservation officer said, you just go ahead and shoot them. And Wes, I think that year he killed 5 wolves. He killed a pack of wolves that were predating his cattle. That was the first time he had a conflict with wolves on this property. He goes out west. He wants to be a cowboy. He goes out west for a little while, and he finally gets lured back to the area, and he works in highway construction for a while. And in the 90s, but a guy that has now owned the land, about 350 acres, decides he's going to sell. And he tells Wes, and he sells the 350 acres to Wes. Wes uses the next 30, 40 years to expand it to its existing 1,500 acres. And he almost always has 600 Red Angus cattle on it. And he has almost every spring from April to September approximately 200 calves. Now let's go to the wolf researchers. Voyager's Wolf Project is a really important wolf research project in the state of Minnesota, and nationally and internationally actually. And it was started by a guy by the name of Tom Gable. And Tom Gable's a great guy. When in 2015 he started this, he was actually researching beaver in Voyageurs National Park, and when he was doing that, he saw that a lot of the beaver were being predated by wolves, and so he wanted to get his doctorate in wildlife biology from the University of Minnesota, and so he started he proposed to study wolves in Voyageurs National Park during the summer. No one had ever done that because it's so difficult. And so his idea was to collar some wolves and track them on GPS, and anytime they were stationary for 20 minutes, they were potentially predating an animal and feeding, and so then they'd go into the forest and they'd try to find that location and see if they could find anything that they ate and document what kind of food wolves ate during the summer. Nobody had ever really done this. Part of the reason this came about was because there's a lot of controversy about wolves predating fawns, deer fawns. In fact, I don't know if any of you take Highway 53 north towards Ely, and there was a huge billboard in Cotton, Minnesota that said, it was put up by the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association of that county that's in, and it was 54,000 fawns are killed by wolves every year. Now, there's no evidence for that kind of thing, and in fact, the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association distanced themselves from that and said, you know, we need to stick to the science. There's no truth to them killing 54,000 fawns every year. But deer hunters hate wolves because they think they're, you know, ruining the deer herd in Minnesota, killing the deer herd. And there's some truth to them predating wolves. A healthy wolf will take about 20 deer a year. So they definitely have an impact, but not nearly what some people think. Anyway, Tom Gable and his buddy Austin Hopkins start this Voyageurs Wolf Project in 2015. And one of the things they do is they're looking at this Voyageurs National Park up here. Now remember, this is approximately 20 miles from the Johnson Ranch down in here. What he does is capture and collar wolves, and then he tracks them, and you can see these are all separate. All these little different colors are separate wolf packs. in the Voyageurs area. But one of the things he notices is that by 2016, as he's watching these wolf packs and tracking them on his GPS, the ones that are collared, he only collars about 10 a year because it's really hard to do and it's very expensive. He sees that one of them has kind of gone on walkabout. Some wolves do that when they want to start a new pack. They'll leave their pack and come down. Came all the way down here, went onto the Johnson Ranch, and the Johnson Ranch trapped him and killed him. Now, Tom Gable got a phone call from John Hart from Wildlife Services. He had never met John Hart. He had never met Wes Johnson. He was familiar with the farm because of the conflict that they've had over the years. And he was familiar with Wildlife Services, who takes out problematic wolves. Called him and said, "We've got a collared wolf that we killed here. Come get your collar." And so Tom Gable and Austin Hopkins come down and they get their collar and they get all the data off of it. And one thing they notice about the data is that that wolf had just come onto the property and had not predated any, and it hadn't had a chance to kill any calves. But it doesn't matter. If it comes onto the Johnson Ranch, they don't know that. They don't know. It could be there were problem wolves, there were some carcasses, and so they killed any wolf that they could trap and find on the property. That was in 2016, and they weren't quite sure what to do. Now, let's talk a minute just about Wildlife Services. One of the things they do is if a farmer or a rancher has a lamb or some livestock that's been predated by wolves, they go onto the property, they examine the kill, hopefully they find a carcass. I mentioned Janet McNally, who lost 75 lambs in 1999 in one season. Those lambs were so small, 8 to 12 pounds each, that they never found any traces of them. The wolves just came, grabbed the lambs, took them off, and devoured them whole. And she didn't get a penny for any of those 75 lambs that were taken. So the standard has always been there has to be a carcass. They were very familiar in Wildlife Services with the Johnson Ranch because they'd get calls all the time. They'd come in, they'd set traps, they'd catch wolves, and they'd take care of the problem for a moment, and then eventually, sometimes for a season, sometimes an entire year, they wouldn't have a problem, but eventually the wolves would come back. Because the Johnson Ranch is surrounded by wolf packs. One of the big problems with Wildlife Services and the Johnson Ranch killing collared wolves is they are really expensive to capture and collar. It is very difficult to capture, to catch alive a wolf and then collar it. And this gives you an idea that over 11 years, the researchers collared 119 wolves. So they probably do, what, 10 a year, something like that, and a little bit more. And this was an article about in all that time, they only found one black wolf, and that's right after they got it in the trap, anesthetized it, and then once they do that, they do a lot of metrics on the wolf. They take its blood, they weigh it, they check its teeth, they do a lot of different stuff to it in addition to putting the collar on. But it's very expensive. So them losing that collared wolf was problematic. The next year, 2016 or 2017, they're tracking wolves that are about 600 yards north of the ranch. And they see one that stopped, for 20 minutes, and so they go into the woods and they find something like this. Actually, they find what Tom Gable, the wolf researcher, thinks is a calf bone. Now, he knows Wes has had problems with predating wolves, and so he he thinks this might be my entree to go create a relationship with Wes. And so he calls up John Hart and proposes to go meet Wes and talk to him. And Austin Homkus and Tom Gable go down to Wes's ranch, and he shows them what they can do by tracking these collared wolves, and he shows them how some of his wolves didn't have anything to do with the predation. And Wes is pretty hard-nosed and says, it doesn't matter, if they come on the ranch, we're going to kill them. And they establish some rapport, and over the next couple of years, Wes allows them to come onto the ranch anytime they see collared wolves coming onto the ranch, and kind of scouting out and tracking them. Moreover, if they find that one of these collared wolves has killed the calf, they let Wes know, and they will help him trap it and get rid of it. So there's trust developing among these different groups. Now, and remember, in 2018 was when Savannah Johnson was out riding the range like she normally does. So all this is going on all the time. So by 2020, everyone is tired. The researchers are tired of losing their wolves, their collared wolves. Wes Johnson is tired of having these wolves predate his cattle. Wildlife Services is tired of having to come out and trap these wolves, and moreover have the USDA pay our money, our taxpayer money, for these cattle, these calves that get taken. Everybody's tired, so they decide, let's have a confab it was March, I think, 2020. It was really cold. Everybody got together. There were probably 7 or 8 people. There's Austin, Wes, Bob, and Savannah are there. Wildlife Services, John Hart is there. A trapper is there. Non-lethal wolf specialist Jack Morozinski is there. He does a lot of stuff to mitigate wolves, making fence, flattery, things like that. They all gather in the now this is in the barn. Now it's really cold that day. This happens to be in the height of COVID. They distance themselves and turn over these 5-gallon buckets to sit on. And they start talking, and it comes up that what Wes and what John Hart think the Voyagers should do is just move all their research elsewhere. Move all your research from Voyagers to deeper into the woods, so we don't have the conflict with your collared wolves. Tom Gable thinks, well, that's crazy. That's like me telling you to move your 1,500-acre ranch. He doesn't say that, but he thinks that. That's crazy, and they kind of throw up their hands. They're all searching for some sort of solution, and eventually Tom Gable just out of the blue says, what do you think about putting a fence around your property? Now mind you, this is 1,500 acres. Turns out that the perimeter of that is 7.5 miles long. I mean, this is a Herculean labor to do, but on this day, for various reasons, in large part because they couldn't think of anything else to do, they decide to move forward and build a fence. And it takes them about 2 years, and a lot of money, a lot of resources, most of all, incredible amount of labor. That's why it takes them 2 years. The first year, they build about 3.5 miles, about half the fence. The next year, they build the rest of the fence, going all around it. And they are, by 2022, they succeed. They fence the entire property. And they think, okay, you know, they're celebrating, they have a great thing, but there's one collared wolf that they have that is somehow finding her way into the ranch. She has become habituated to to feeding, wolves are scavengers, to feeding on calf manure, because calf manure is very rich in nutrients, and so that's her source of food. She doesn't kill calves, she just goes in and feeds on the manure. It's really fortuitous that she's one of the collared wolves, because they can see where she's getting in, so they can find all these gaps in the fence where she leads them to. And one of them is that she goes to a swampy area, and they actually have to put a skirt on the ground, a wire skirt, and she's figured out how to dig up underneath that skirt and get in there. And so then they have to go around and stake the skirt down all the way around. Net, they seal off the entire thing. Savannah Johnson, after that, they get the female wolf ends up going elsewhere because she finally can't get to feed on the calf scat. But Savannah Johnson one day is going in the area, and she sees a wolf in this really tight-knit fenced area. Not only that, she finds a killed calf, and they just throw up their hands in disgust. They can't believe it. And Tom Gable comes up with a great idea. He says, Wes, work with us here. Rather than just kill the wolf, let's collar it and see how in the hell that wolf is getting in here. So we can do the same thing we did with the female wolf. Sure enough, they do that, and this wolf exhibits behavior that they've never seen before. It is actually learning how to jump over the fence. It comes in a bunch of different areas. They have the GPS. They go out to the GPS and they see where it's jumping across. They can see where it creates these sort of runways before it jumps over the fence. And it goes in, and it has killed predated calves before, and so they kind of throw up their hands and they decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. We are going to go out and get guard dogs. And they do. They get 2 Anatolian 100-pound guard dogs. And these guard dogs, I've learned, are incredibly effective, and it completely stops their problem. The wolf never gets back in there. And then within 6 months, both that female wolf and the other wolf that was jumping, turns out, was the son of the female wolf. That's how he became habituated to that ranch. They both die. The female wolf is struck by a car, and the male wolf that was jumping the fence gets poisoned. It's something they're still investigating. They're not sure who did that or why, but anyway, they're no longer a problem. And since 2022, they have not had a problem. This is a really good success story that I really enjoy telling in the book, because now Wes Johnson is happy, the wildlife researchers are happy, and the wildlife services folks are really happy because they don't have to trap, they don't have to reimburse for these wolves anymore. So it is possible to take care of the wolf problem and to coexist with it here, even though we have the most in the lower 48, the most wolves. And that's one of the guard dogs. Wes, Tom Gable actually put some collars on those dogs so they can track the dogs, and the dogs just pretty much have free reign of the ranch. Okay. The most important part of the program. I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I covered in the book, and by a show of hands, someone is going to walk away with a free book. The only recourse for preventing wolves from killing livestock is to trap or shoot them. True? False? Yes. See, really good listeners. Farmers who lose livestock to wolves and can prove it are reimbursed by the state. True? Yes, true. You're all still in the running. Last question. There are almost no wolves currently living in Minnesota. True? False? False. Here's how I decide who wins a tie. The guy sitting closest to me. Oh, yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, questions.
So I was confused from the beginning. So the farmer's allowed, even though this is after there's a ban on killing wolves, he can shoot them anyway on his property?
Well, that's kind of a gray area. If the wolf, what they're supposed to do, what a farmer is supposed to do is if they've lost livestock and they can prove it, they have to have a carcass or they have to have a partial carcass, then they're supposed to call Wildlife Services, the USDA Wildlife Services, and they'll come out and they'll examine the kill. They look at teeth marks, and because if it's a coyote, the farmer doesn't get reimbursed.
Right,
So it
but
has
early
to-
on you said that Wes Johnson killed a collared wolf that that the Voyager people said hadn't killed anybody.
No, but I'm sorry, I probably misspoke. Early on, Wes Johnson shot wolves. He shot before they were on the endangered species
before.
list. But when that happened, Wildlife Services came out and killed the collared wolf. And it was actually John Hart, the Wildlife Services supervisor, who called the wolf researchers, Austin Homkus and Tom Gable, and told them, come get your collared wolf.
So even though they're on the endangered list,
If
they
you
will kill them if they're killing wild.
Absolutely.
Wild.
Absolutely. And even Tom Gable, the wolf reacher, says if a wolf becomes habituated to livestock, to getting their food, that you can't retrain the wolf. You can't even, like, he couldn't even take the wolf up into Voyagers 20 miles away because wolves are marathoners. So they have to get rid of the wolf. There's not much that they can do other than that.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd heard it from a wolf researcher on some podcast that when they introduced some into Washington State or Oregon, they made a mistake of trying to move one that was already used to eating cattle, and they're just like, well, you just infected the area, and then since they learned from each other, they're like, that was a big error, and maybe they knew that afterwards and they don't do that, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, and wolves do learn. Like the mother wolf that became habituated to calf scat on the ranch, she must have taught one of her male pups that the ranch is a place where we can find food, and he became habituated to it. So, yeah. What they were really afraid of is that that one that jumped, learned how to jump, would teach the other wolves how to jump, and they really didn't want that. Anything else? Yeah.
Will they not kill dogs, or were these special dogs they were afraid of?
These dogs are so big, and they're specially bred to be guard dogs, and they will kill wolves. I mean, they're really strong. But it's not that they don't come with some baggage themselves. Savannah Johnson has cattle dogs, smaller dogs, on the ranch, and she's lost a couple of the cattle dogs to the guard dogs because they'll see them and mistake them for a coyote or something, and so they're tough animals. They're really nice. I met them. They're very good to humans and they're good with cattle, but they can be trouble with other dogs.
Does the state come and help other farmers, the smaller farms, and do they help protect them?
Yeah, the state does. The USDA Wildlife Services does a lot of programs like this. They did another one. Part of the reason they agreed to do the fence is because they had up by Effie, I think is the name of a town up in northern Minnesota. Up near Effie, they did a fence installation to someone who had annual problem with wolves and killing sheep and calves. And it was very effective. So they had already done it and knew it, and it had actually been funded with a grant. Much of the Wes Johnson's ranch was funded with grants, and it was a real group effort. But a lot of it was they just took care of it themselves, especially the Voyageurs Wolf Project. They got people to help fund it.
Now, is the Minnesota DNR in control of the state population in Minnesota? Because I was told that there's a judge in California that regulated the population of wolves in Minnesota.
Well, right now, the wolves in Minnesota are protected under the Endangered Species Act. So the Minnesota DNR, I think it was 2012, 13, and 14, they came off the list, and the Minnesota DNR managed trapping and hunting season for wolves. And, you know, that's where a lot of people want to go back to. A lot of the deer hunters want to go back to that. They think, and the DNR would manage that. They'd manage them just like they manage deer or any other animals they hunt. But because they're still on the list, and yeah, a judge put them on the list, kept them there. The DNR is ready. They actually, you can go out on the internet and find the wolf management plan that they have, which talks about trapping and hunting, but they haven't been able to do it yet because they're still on the list. I think that's where they're going to get.
Still allowed in Wisconsin, correct? You can.
Well, they were taken off the list briefly in Wisconsin, and yes, then they did have a hunting season, and they way over. They were supposed to, I think, kill about 300, and they ended up killing about 500 or something like that. And I think the Wisconsin DNR was involved in that, so they managed it, and then they kind of backed off. And then I think they got back on the list in Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula. It's very controversial though. Out west, Idaho, Montana, they have an open season. In fact, in some of those places, in Idaho in particular, you can run them down and shoot them from snowmobiles. You can shoot them from planes. I mean, it's very controversial, and the different states manage wolves differently. And in Idaho, in particular, in Montana, ranchers have a huge political power in those states, and so they've pushed through laws that you can do a lot of crazy stuff, trap and shoot, and Wyoming too. Thank you very much. You guys have been great. Really appreciate your time.